Elizabeth Holmes had a competitive spirit from childhood. Elizabeth Ann Holmes knew she wanted to be a successful entrepreneur. At 7 she designed a time machine and filled up a notebook with engineering drawings. She was a straight A student in high school and got accepted into Stanford as a President's Scholar in 2002. She lobbied her way into assisting in Channing Robertson's research lab. Robertson was the face of Stanford's chemical engineering department at the time. Holmes attended his seminar on controlled drug delivery devices. Holmes dropped out of Stanford after returning from a summer internship at the Genome Institute of Singapore. She had spent the summer testing patient specimens obtained with old low-tech methods like syringe and nasal swabs. Asia, in 2003, had been ravaged by the spread of severe acute respiratory syndrome (SARS). Holmes wrote a patent application for an arm patch that would simultaneously diagnose medical conditions and treat them. She was determined that she could draw from her experiences in Robertson's classes and her internship. She recruited Shonik Roy, Robertson's PhD student, as her first employee upon launch of the company. Holmes started off operations in Burlingame but later moved to an industrial zone in Menlo Park. She leveraged on her family connections and convinced Tim Draper, a former neighbor, to invest $1 million in her firm. By the end of 2004, she had raised $6 million from investors. 18 months on the job, Shonik began to feel they were making progress. The company had launched their first prototype Theranos 1.0, grown by 23 more staff, and had been listed by the technology magazine Red Herring as the hottest startup in the valley. The first successful prototype was finally born and named after Thomas Edison. Edmund Koo was sought by Holmes to take over engineering at Theranos. Koo earned himself the reputation of being a fix-it man in the valley. Signing up for Theranos was the biggest challenge Koo encountered as he crossed fields to work on medical devices. Holmes urged Koo to run his department all day long. Koo opined that for optimal performance, it was better the engineers rested well. Holmes eventually set up a rival engineering department headed by Tony Nugent, who redesigned the Theranos by cutting out the microfluid processes Koo used. This design was successful and she named the new design Edison. Steve Jobs remained the object of obsession for young entrepreneurs in the valley. Holmes referred to the blood testing system of Theranos as the iPod of the healthcare sector. Admiration for Apple provided the opportunity for Holmes to encounter Anna Arriola. Arriola agreed to join Theranos as its chief designer. She hired Yves Behar to design an industrial model for the Edison. After a while, Arriola realized that Theranos was still far from completing its blood testing device. Arriola reached out to Avi Tevanian, a shareholder at Theranos. Tevanian saw that all revenue projections were not realistic. He decided to challenge the chairman Don Lucas. Research proved to Tevanian that things were wrong and he eventually left Theranos. Holmes was fired as CEO but sought re-election and fired those responsible for her previous firing. Moving from East Palo Alto to Palo Alto in 2008 marked a new era at Theranos. Holmes had exaggerated the projections and the trials conducted were failing woefully. Holmes saw that the Tennessee trial was bound to fail and shifted to the Swiss giant, Novartis. In Switzerland, the devices performed terribly and Holmes ruled that out as a technical glitch. Todd Surdie, the sales executive, sought Michael Esquivel and brought the issues of stability to the board via Tom Brodeen. The board met and agreed to set aside the CEO while Tom Brodeen was elected CEO. Holmes sought a second chance to run the company. She promised accountability and transparency too. A few weeks after being restored to power, Holmes fired Surdie and Esquivel. Holmes' parents were neighbors with the entrepreneur cum medical investor Richard Fuas and his wife Lorraine. Being a trained physician, Fuas built a fortune from the sales of medical patents. For $53 million, he sold his company to Vernon Locks. On a trip, Noel informed Lorraine about Holmes' advancement with Theranos. Richard wasn't so pleased that Holmes felt his expertise on medical patents wasn't needed and filed with his lawyer Alan Schiavelli for a patent that exploited some weaknesses he saw in Theranos. Gary Frenzel of Theranos would not find about this patent until 18 months after registration. This was in January 2008. Holmes decided to sue. On the recommendation of Chuck, a friend of her father, she went to Ken Page of McDermott. She had initially registered her patent through this firm. John Fuas, the son of Richard Fuas, was, however, a partner at the firm. McDermott dropped the suit after considering it unwise to attack a parent to a partner. Ramesh Balwani became the Indian general who turned up the heat at Theranos. Chelsea Burkitt had been close friends with Holmes since they met at Stanford. They went to parties together and kept in touch after Holmes dropped out. Unsatisfied with her job, she reached out to Holmes, who pitched Theranos to her. Burkitt agreed to join her. Burkitt was hired to work with the validation studies groups. The arrival of Ramesh Sunny Balwani began to make issues complex for her. Balwani had made a fortune of about $41 million from a commercial deal in the late 90s. Occupying the unexplainable role of the vice executive chairman, Balwani saw to it that staff remained intimidated at Theranos. Seeing that the Pfizer deal was about to be lost, Elizabeth sent Burkitt and Daniel Young to Belgium to pitch the Edison. The device frequently brought up the error message and the trip was unsuccessful. Similar results were obtained when Holmes tried assessing the spread of swine flu in Mexico. Burkitt grew frustrated about these problems. Balwani kept terrorizing staff. He fired Seth Michelson, the engineer from NASA, and threatened to have Tony Nugent removed. Burkitt decided to quit her job when Holmes recommended Edison, which was still far from completion, for diagnosis of a cancer patient. From the health sector to the military, Holmes would stop at nothing to keep Theranos afloat. Jay Rosen, known as Dr. J, of Walgreens stores, was approached by Holmes. Thrilled by Edison, other Walgreens executives, Kevin Hunter, Jim Sundberg, and Renat van den Hoof, met with Theranos and pledged to invest in the firm. Both parties also agreed that tests were to be carried out on Edison. Suspicious of the unwillingness to release blood test results, Hunter inquired from Dr. J and also discovered that Johns Hopkins hadn't certified Edison as Theranos claimed, and the number of blood samples their cartridges could test was falsified. Dr. J wasn't interested in Hunter's theories. Holmes and Balwani declined Hunter access to the board meetings of Walgreens and Theranos. Under the leadership of Trish Lipinski, Walgreens finally agreed to be the distributor of Edison cartridges in their stores. Holmes claimed Edison could carry out over 100 tests on blood samples. Whereas in reality, it could only do the immunoassays tests. To live up to her claim, she hired Kent Frankovich in November 2010. Frankovich hired Greg Bainey, an associate from NASA. Frankovich and Bainey were given the resources needed to build the new design. This design was called Minilab. Safeway's business continued to plummet. While faced with a team of analysts, Steve Bird said that Safeway was working on a wellness plan that could revolutionize medicine. The Minilab was taking a longer time than expected. Holmes maintained that the earthquake in Japan in March 2011 halted the production of cartridges for use. After 2 years, Holmes agreed that Safeway set up the clinics in its stores. These labs weren't fitted with the Minilab but collected blood samples from patients and processed them in Theranos lab back in East Palo Alto. The labs had secured a license from the government. Kent Bradley from Safeway first observed that the processes weren't instantaneous and the test results weren't reconcilable with what other labs said. At the clinic, an employee, Diana DePai, had also complained about the sloppiness and inexperience of Kosal Lim. Balwani found a way to toss out her claims. He fired and hired her again on the recommendation of Arnold Gelb, the pathologist in the lab, and sent her off 3 weeks after the incident. The lack of returns from the establishment of the clinics infuriated Safeway's board members. Safeway released a statement on 3 January 2013 that its CEO, Steve Bird, was to retire after its annual general meeting in May. Holmes ceased to communicate with them directly. Balwani was also very aggressive in dealing with them afterwards. Holmes decided to shift focus to the military. She met with 4-star General James Mattis, who was very popular because he fiercely protected his troops in the Middle East. Jim "Mad Dog" Mattis fell in love with Holmes' pitch and ordered that his subordinates at CENTCOM adopt this machine to work on the soldiers. Meeting CENTCOM wasn't as friendly as meeting Jim. Lieutenant Colonel David Shoemaker immediately faulted the structure. LTC Shoemaker also insisted that the FDA signed up on the device before it was tested on soldiers. To counter his arguments, Theranos noted that their tests were lab-based and the FDA couldn't purview them. LTC Shoemaker, with the help of Jeremiah Kelly, an attorney at the FDA, filed the incident with them. This kicked off a mail exchange between the 4-star General James Mattis and Holmes. She alleged that LTC Shoemaker attempted to taint the good name of Theranos. LTC Shoemaker apologized, seeing his intentions had played out wrongly. LTC Shoemaker retired a while later, having survived his encounter with General Jim Mattis. Holmes engaged in legal bouts with the FUAs while she was busy doctoring data and falsifying information on Theranos. In October 2011, Holmes decided to take the fight to the FUAs. She sued Richard for conspiring with Joe and John FUAs to steal confidential patent information and file a rival patent. Holmes hired David Boies to handle the process. Boies stepped into the limelight in the 90s when he was hired by the Department of Justice in a case against Microsoft. He reportedly deposed Bill Gates for over 20 hours. FUAs hired Kecker and Van Nest to handle the litigation. Referencing a case from the 90s, Boies argued that it was habitual of John to funnel stolen information to his father. Under deposition, John performed woefully. Boies ended John's career with the legal charades. Searching for clues to help his case, FUAs came across a scientist, Ian Gibbons. Boies didn't allow FUAs to reach out to him. It was time to design the Theranos website. O'Neill worked with Chiat Day TWBA, an advertising agency Apple formerly used. This project featured people of different ages, work groups and races. This was to convey the message, everyone is welcome. Theranos claimed that they could run over 800 tests on a sample of blood, and their testing methods were more accurate than traditional methods. In order to prevent a liability suit for misleading advertisement, Chiat Day asked for non-disclosure to be put on the website. Seeing that she wasn't going to get away easily with the exaggerated description of the device, Holmes agreed to modify the content of her website 2 days to its launch in April 2013. Holmes hoodwinked her way into getting more money from investors and increased her worth to $5 billion on the back of a product that did not work. A couple of weeks to the launch, Alan Beam was hired to replace Arnold Gelb, who left in April 2012. Bilwani kept employing incompetent Indians who were ready to dance to his tune. Holmes ignored repeated warnings about the uselessness of the product because she was only interested in the bottom line. The commercial launch of Theranos coincided with the day Holmes' name featured in the Wall Street Journal. Pulitzer Prize winner Joseph Rago wrote this piece. Former Secretary of State, George Shultz, had recommended him for the job. George had heard Holmes pitch somewhere and was captivated by the idea. In 2012, George described her ideas as the next big thing in medicine. Rago did a great job of selling the technology of testing blood in minutes and processing the samples at economic rates. Rago wasn't aware that Holmes wanted to use the Walgreens launch and his accompanying article as public validation of her success. This would kickstart another round of fundraising. Holmes reached out to Donald A. Lucas, son of Donald L. Lucas. She agreed to sell to him at a discounted rate. Mike Barsanti wasn't interested until he heard that the chips were already being used in Iraq. Mike pulled out $790,000 to invest in Theranos. With an inflated revenue projection, Holmes finally got the club of James Christopher, Brain Grossman, George Shultz, and other government officials to commit to Theranos. Holmes' net worth in February 2014 was calculated to be about $5 billion. After an internship at Theranos, Tyler Shultz, grandson of George Shultz, changed fields from engineering to biology. He had just resumed when things began to go awry in 2013. He was disappointed when he saw the Edison. Tyler met Erica Chung shortly after he started working at Theranos. They were both on the immunoassays team till November 2013, when Chung was transferred to a clinic in Normandy. At Normandy, Theranos conducted tests on the Edison. Soon Chung discovered that the device produced varying results and failed repeatedly. Bilwani, however, compelled that the device is used for testing nonetheless. Early 2014, Tyler joined Chung and observed the same pattern of failure with the Edison. After reaching out to Holmes, he got referred to Daniel Young. With a catfish account by the name Colin Ramirez, he sought the attention of Stefan Schulman from the New York State Clinic Evaluation Program. Weeks passed and Tyler didn't get the answers he desired. After a brutal exchange of mail with Bilwani, Tyler decided to quit his job. According to his grandfather, he was in the wrong. Chung resigned from Theranos the following day. FUAs inadvertently made Holmes richer and more popular with an article that was supposed to smear her reputation. Boies had worn out Ricard FUAs and Sons. Spending over $2 million, the Fuse decided to go pro se by letting Joe handle the case. Boys took Joe Fua's apart. The Fuse further quaked their case with conflicting statements at the deposition. In March 2014, Richard and Boys met to settle the case. Fuas agreed to withdraw his patent in Theranos, its suit. Disgruntled, John Fuas hired Julia Love of the American Lawyer Media to publish an article. In it, he claimed Boys had bribed the other Fuse and threatened to sue them all. Roger Parloff of Fortune magazine stumbled on this article in the and decided to meet Holmes. After a 7-hour interview, he was engulfed by the Theranos and what it stood for. In his next article, The CEO Out for Blood, he described Holmes and her dreams to save the world with just a drop of blood. This commenced a grand entry to stardom for Holmes. Interested in Theranos, Forbes and other big names in journalism came and saw. Everyone wanted to know the company valued at $9 billion. Obama made Holmes an ambassador and Theranos had to upgrade her security detail. Alan Beam finally connected the dots and met a few like-minded persons who were ready to reveal the ruse Holmes and Theranos were engaged in. Alan Beam grew tired of schemes at Theranos. He couldn't access the control test data. In a meeting with the scientist, Curtis Schneider, he aired his complaints. Beam began moving mails he had shared with Balwani and Young to his private Gmail account. In December 2014, Beam decided to resign. Balwani found the mails and compelled him to delete after he signed an affidavit. Refusing to delete, Theranos threatened to sue him. On the counsel of his lawyer, Beam decided to delete the 175 mails. Adam Clapper faulted the New Yorker's publication. He was certain tiny drops of blood couldn't suffice. Research revealed there was no study to prove Theranos' claims. When Beam met with Clapper, Gardner, Richard Fuas, Joe Fuas and Rochelle Ian, he told them about the things Theranos did that betrayed the Hippocratic Oath. Beam forwarded his findings on Theranos to John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal in February 2015. Carreyrou spoke with Beam on 26 February 2015. Beam listed different employees that left the firm for similar reasons. Many weren't willing to break confidentiality, but Tyler Schultz, Erica Chung, and some made contact later. About Theranos, Beam said it wasn't using its technology in some clinics but used Siemens. Several doctors who had used Edison said it constantly failed. With no idea of how powerful the opponent was, Carreyrou summed up these findings and set out to publish a story. Theranos sent threatening mails in an attempt to silence any attempt at revealing its trade secrets. Tyler Schultz soon came under heavy fire from Theranos. He was sued for releasing confidential information about Theranos to Carreyrou. After several failed attempts to reach Tyler Schultz and Holmes, John Carreyrou eventually set up a meeting with David Boies. The meeting was scheduled for the 11th of June 2015. David Boies came to the meeting with Mike Brill, Meredith Dearborn, Daniel Young, and King Heather. In anticipation of a crossfire, John Carreyrou came with Jay Conte and Mike Sikanoff, who headed the investigation team. The meeting started with King's remarks to rebut false premises. Boies kept cool initially while King and Mike did the yelling. Daniel Young agreed that Theranos owned and used other devices but was for comparison and not operations. While asked if Siemens was one specifically, he called it a trade secret. On Edison, Young agreed that it had flaws but was past that. He said they had moved from that technology. The number of tests it could perform was a trade secret. Theranos didn't disclose anything on their patients as Carreyrou wasn't willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement. After the meeting, Theranos wrote to Carreyrou in a mail. They threatened to sue if he wrote anything that was a trade secret or defamatory. In July 2015, FDA approved Minilab for testing on the HSV-1 project. The state of Arizona passed a bill that permitted people to test their blood without the doctor's order. Theranos became concerned about certain issues. The incident with Lieutenant Commander David Shoemaker made Holmes tread with caution around FDA. Theranos installed its devices in Walgreens stores but didn't commercialize them. This was a plan to remain popular without drawing heat from the FDA. The clinics fitted with the Minilabs also collected blood samples but processed them with other blood analyzers. The level of deception kept increasing. Michael Craig was hired to mask code failure in the Minilab. Holmes and Balwani designed an empty space that was made to look like a lab when Joe Biden visited Theranos. Unqualified Sunil Dhawan was employed to run a clinic since Alan Beam left. Months away from a decision that could hamper John Carreyrou and Mike Ciccanole's case was the appearance of Holmes at annual Wall Street's Journal of Technology conference in November. She had been invited as the guest speaker. It was, however, Mike's suggestion that they waited and caught the prey off guard. Up to that point, all the important people in the case weren't willing to come forward. Methodical and thorough research eventually revealed the truth about Theranos, and there was no hiding place for Holmes this time. Holmes leaned on Rupert Murdoch, who had already invested $150 million in Theranos to kill the rumors. Rupert Murdoch was a shareholder at the Fox Broadcasting Network. Holmes wanted to tap into his resources, but Rupert declined. Theranos decided to meet with the editor-in-chief, Jerry Baker. Baker insisted that Mike Ciccanoff, John Carreyrou, and Neil Lipschitz were present at the meeting. In the meeting, Boys admitted some tests weren't run on the company's proprietary device, negating what Young said. An internal exhibition was organized for Carreyrou. Figuring it would delay by weeks, Carreyrou moved for publication. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled "A Prized Startup Struggle." This was directly aimed at Theranos. Hell broke loose as people were torn between the sides of the case. In a publication by Boys, he claimed the allegations were falsified and a suit was imminent. In bringing the truth to light, Carreyrou published other articles on the inconsistencies he found about Theranos. To deliver the final blow, Carreyrou needed to find what the CMS had observed after it carried out an inspection and regulation test at Theranos. Chung's tip to Gary Yamamoto set the CMS out to inspect Theranos labs. In her letter to Yamamoto, Chung listed that they were guilty of scientific misconduct, sloppy practices, and the initial inspector who came in fall 2013 had been deceived. Acting on this intelligence, Sarah Burnett and Yamamoto set out to visit the Theranos labs. Litigation and bureaucracy stood in their way. After inspection, CMS gave Theranos time to fix the labs up. Incriminating publications led the CMS to inspect the labs again. The secrets of Theranos were unraveled this time around. King Heather threatened to sue CMS if the reports from the lab were released. When NBC's Today interviewed Holmes, she claimed she was sorry and displeased with the state of things. Investors began to pull out. Boys also dropped Theranos. Lawsuits came and Holmes was forced to shut the labs down. Under a settlement with the Arizona's Attorney General, Theranos agreed to pay $4.65 million to a state fund as reimbursement for 76,217 Arizonans who ordered their blood test from the company. If Theranos had expanded to all the 8,134 Walgreens stores in the United States, the chances that people would have died from misdiagnoses and wrong medical treatment would have risen exponentially. Conclusion. Bad Blood tells a riveting but true story of how a lady with an ambition to transform the medical world by cutting down the time it took to run blood tests got herself involved in an elaborate scam. She lied to investors and got them to put their money in a project that never delivered on its promise. She eluded discovery until a few bold people saved the world from the crises of missed diagnoses. Try this: take the time to ask questions about medical devices that have the potential of affecting patients' health significantly.